Thank you, first of all, for everyone joining me. And as I look at all the people that are signed in, I think it looks like most people have either sort of some to a good deal of four-way experience. But I still feel like it's really worthwhile to kind of talk about the basics of four-way and starting from like scratch and then taking it from there, and I think even if you have a lot of experience, there may be some thoughts here that you either may not have quite known exactly that way, or you'll hear it described in a way that is a little bit different than the way you thought of it. And hopefully these little things conceptually will improve your flying and your four-way as well. And also I think the concepts that I talk about here, while I'm talking about it in the context of four-way, really apply to kind of all formation skydiving. And I would even say for a lot of it, not just FS, not just belly stuff, but even free flying and even sort of anything that's relative, so even wingsuiting kind of stuff can have similar concepts. But I'm gonna first start with talking about what is four-way, and I like to start with a little video of a four-way jump. Here's one. So can you all still hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up if you hear me? Yeah, cool. Okay. So this is an example of a four-way jump, and this is one of our jumps at Nationals this year. The jump, for anyone that's interested, was what, B2KE, I think. So yeah, basically what I want to say is go up there and just do that, or faster if you like. Thank you everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, okay, so obviously what you can see we're doing is we're building a bunch of formations. I'll talk about different kinds of formations, but high level stuff. Four-way includes 4 skydivers and a videographer, and in competition four-way you get 35 seconds to score as many points as you can. And when does that start? It starts at the moment the first person leaves the plane. So you can kind of see in this video, it's sort of just starting as we're going, but right at that moment, as the first person left the plane, the clock starts, and now you have 35 seconds from that moment to get as many points as you can. There are 2 kinds of formations. They're randoms and they're blocks. And I think this has a good example of a random is a single formation, and a block is a starting formation. There's an inter, which is a prescribed movement, and then the second final formation. So if I step through, this is the beginning of a block, block 2. Now the move is that there's a 3-way donut that's going to spin backwards, and one solo flyer is going to spin around it. And now as soon as he's done that move, that's the finish of the block, and that earns a second point. So it's 1 point for the top, a second point for the move and the inter. Then we can see that the following formations are single random. So this is a random, it's called random K or hook. Whoops, going too fast. So we have random K or hook. We have random E, whoops, or meeker, and then a random, oops, sorry, B or stair step. There, yeah. Okay, so 2 different kinds of formations, randoms and blocks. Randoms are a single formation, blocks are a starting formation, and inter, which is a prescribed move to get from the first formation to a final formation. And you get 1 point for doing the top of the block. You get 1 point for doing the prescribed move plus finishing it with the final formation. There are four positions in four-way. And I'm going to show you with I'm going to show you a set of randoms. So here's an example of one random side body. And in the side body, you can see there's 4 different formations and they're color coded: red, green, blue, and yellow. Oh, you can't see my screen? Okay, hold on, sorry. I'm gonna go to the randoms. So do you see, what do you see right now?
We're seeing a menu with randoms in it.
Okay. So can you see us in the tunnel?
We're looking at a tunnel.
All right, cool, cool. So here we have random P or side body. And in the side body, you can see that in this video, we've got color coded with helmets. There are 4 colors: red, green, blue, and yellow, and they indicate the 4 different positions. Point is red, green is outside center, blue is inside center, and yellow is tail. Now, why is that? I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'm gonna show you a picture that explains it. Okay, here you go. Do you guys all see my screen again?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, and you see the 2 pictures I'm sharing?
Yep.
So this is the same exit, a bow exit. On the left, we have just as it's leaving the door, and on the right, we have it just outside the door. What you can see is the positions are named after where you are in the door typically for your position. So in the front, we have the point. In the rear, we have the tail. So we have point and tail. Outside of the door, but in the middle between point and tail, is outside center. And inside the door between point and tail is inside center. So if we weren't doing 4-way, we might call the front diver, or point the front diver. We might call the inside center the rear diver. We might call the outside center the front floater, and we might call the tail the rear floater. But while it's not required, there's nothing in the rules that say each position needs to do these things. By convention, the outside center and point and inside center and tail typically are in these spots in the door when they exit, and then that typically dictates where they are in other formations. So if I go to a diagram here. Okay, so here we have like a whole bunch of different formations, and you can see color coding: green outside center, red point, blue inside center, and yellow tail for all of what we call the randoms, right? They're typically in the 4 positions, they typically have different characteristics, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those characteristics now. So if you were building a team, you might think about these a little bit. Although what I would say is, on a high level, I think really just about anybody can do just about any position. And I think when it comes to people deciding on what position they should be, if someone has my feeling is always, if someone has a really, really strong opinion, then cool, let them do that. But then I'm also going to give you some guidelines and some thoughts about the different positions and qualities of those. So if I start off, I'm going to talk about the point. And I like to use the dive we just looked at as an example. So I'm going to go back to new share. Going to go back to sharing my app. I'm going to go back to training videos. I'm going to go back to the one that we were just looking at. Stop 33.
We have a video.
Okay, so I'm talking about the point right now. And the point is, there's the three of us are in the donut. The point is a solo flyer right there. And what you'll notice is on the randoms, he's not really moving very much. But then on the block, he's the guy who gets to spin around, right? So random, 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 not a whole lot of movement. Block, he gets to spin around. Random, 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 block, he gets to spin around. And that's very typical of the point in four-way. The point has smaller, precise moves as in the randoms, and in the blocks, he has often the very big moves. Also, for point, the point also usually goes over on formations. A lot of times he's out facing. So that if you have someone that's more comfortable with out facing, that's really good. And a lot of times they're being gripped on versus taking grips, relatively speaking. So that's the points roll. If I go to tail, I'm going to show you another video for tail. Okay, so here's a video that I think shows a lot of the characteristics of tail. First of all, we know that the tail is in the back of the door. And this dive has a block 22 in it, which was that spin that we just saw, the two-person spin. Tail is usually, if there's spinning going on, the tail is usually the guy doing the spinning, and the centers are often the people that are getting spun. So here he is spinning me. That's Doug spinning me in block 22. Also, you'll notice that in the formations, the tail is facing inwards. So the guy who is spinning is also often facing inwards, and here he is. You're going to see him in the back of the cat spinning me. So some characteristics of a tail are it certainly is nice if they're strong, because they have to move a big person around quite a bit. They're typically in facing. They often are the person going under on pieces when there's verticals. So if there is a heavier and not as heavy person, it doesn't hurt to have the heavier person being the person going underneath. And those are some of the qualities of the tail. Now let's look at an example of a dive and outside center. So this dive is OQF15, or it's three randoms and a block. And again, we can see that this exit's a little bit different from others, so I won't worry about that. But now the outside center in this dive is me with the red helmet. You can see that as outside center, I'm doing a lot of the turning in the randoms, while the rest of the group is doing a little bit less turning in the randoms. And that's very typical of outside center in randoms. Now the inside center, also for outside center, the outside center typically, if there's a group going over and a group going under in verticals, the outside center along with a point typically goes over. In almost all blocks, the outside center goes over. The outside center has big moves in the randoms, but both centers typically have smaller moves in the blocks, where they make a small step out, and then the point and tail do bigger moves in blocks. Now, I'd like to talk for this time, I'm going to use this to also show you a little bit about the inside center. So the inside center is Jeanette in this video, and there she is with the blue helmet. And you can see in the randoms that she doesn't have a lot of movement, but not sure if you can tell or not, but she's the one with the keys. So she's sort of like the conductor in the dive, indicating when it's time to move on. So inside center doesn't have really big moves, but they're like the quarterback or the conductor driving the pace and telling everybody else when to go.
Can you slow the video, Steve?
Can I slow the video? Yep. Here's the video in slow-mo.
Yeah, that's better.
Cool. So just as the outside center typically goes over in blocks, the inside center typically is under when there are verticals in blocks. And I'm going to show you an example of a block to kind of exemplify that. So next I'm going to open up a block. So this is a block that a lot of people, the first block you learn for a lot of people is block 21 or zigzag marquee. I'm going to just show it to you once, and then talk about how some of the things I talked about with the blocks apply here. So you can see green and blue are inside center and outside center as a reminder. Red and yellow are point and tail. The inside center and outside center, you can see, make a little move to step away from each other, but they're actually being controlled and spun around by their partners, the point and tail. The point and tails swing around their partners, so they have much bigger move, and then they put their partners back together. If we look at the vertical, we can see that yellow and blue, which are the inside center and tail, are underneath, and red and green, which are outside center and point, are over. So block 21 is a really good example of the characteristics that are sort of true in so many blocks for point, tail, outside center, and inside center. Okay. Next, I'm going to talk about the formations and axes. So, let me share. So you can see in my drawing of the randoms here, do you guys all see what I'm sharing? Do you see the randoms again? Yeah, okay, cool. Getting a little bit better at going between one and the other. Do you see that for every formation here, there are lines behind the formation? It's kind of easier in this image to see the y-axis, but there's a y-axis and an x-axis. I think it's just for some reason the video is not quite showing the x-axis as well. But do you guys all see that? Every formation can be drawn on the x and y axis, and doing that, this is a really good frame of reference how to get from one position to the next. Whenever we're building formations, we do it relative to the x and y axis. The y axis is known as the long axis, and the x axis is known as the short axis. Why is that? Is because in most formations, the x-axis, which is where blue and green, or the centers are closer to each other, and the y-axis is farther from the people on the y-axis, yellow and red, or point and tail, are farther from each other. So look at formation A, for instance. Red and yellow are kind of farther away from each other than blue and green, who are actually touching each other. So blue and green are on the short axis, and red and yellow are on the long axis. That's also why we call the inside center and outside center the centers, and the point and tail are sometimes called the wings. There's the centers on the inside, the wings on the outside. And if you look at random A, if you look at random C, if you look at random E, if you look at random G, so many of these formations, you consistently see that the point and tail are farther from each other than inside and center and outside center are. Next, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about, I made up this little video on using the axis and understanding the diagrams to be in the right position. So in this little video here, you guys still see what I'm sharing here? It looks like you see a star? Yeah, okay. So in this little video, I've got a star, and we're gonna move from a star to a side body. Now, intuitively, if I were gonna move from a star to a side body, here's a side body, you might say I could just do it like this, right? I could just step. If we go back, I can just step the blue man forward, everybody turns 90, yellow and red sort of shift over, and I make a side body. And that, if you didn't know better, that would sound like a pretty good way to do it. And that's the way I see a lot of people go from one formation to the next. However, that's actually not the most efficient way to do it. Instead, it should look something more like this. Notice that blue and green are not going straight forward at each other, but actually shifting a little bit. And so if we compare the two diagrams, you see the difference? In one, over to the left, the side body stayed exactly on the X and Y axis for point and tail, inside center and outside center. And on the right, they shifted a little bit. And why did we do that? We did that because point and tail are typically farther away from each other. And by rotating a little bit, we're able to give the blue guy a little bit of hip for the yellow guy. And the red guy is giving a little bit of hip to the green guy. And the red and yellow, didn't have to slide over quite as much on the right as on the left. Do people see that? Can you give me a thumbs up if you understand what I'm saying there? So over to the left, red and yellow needed to shift over to the left and right quite a bit. Over on the right side, we see red and yellow could stay much closer to the y-axis. They've translated less, and translation takes a lot of time, and therefore we've minimized the time it took to go from the star to the side body on the picture to the right. So understanding these little angle heading changes is really, really helpful for us to be maximally efficient going from one formation to the next. And if we go back to the drawings, you can see those heading changes. You can see those angles. And as you all are trying to build these formations, if you can kind of keep that in mind, you make your moves even that much more efficient. The other thing that I want to point out about this is who's really responsible for setting the angle correct. While I can say we all are, it's really the inside center. The inside center is going to be the most critical for sort of setting an angle, and everybody's going to read off of the inside center. So as inside center, you want to understand exactly where you are on every random according to these diagrams, and then you'll get into the position related to that. Next, I want to talk a little bit about continuity. So I'll pause it. If we go back to these diagrams, you can see that there's a sort of red, green, yellow, blue, all have a specific role in all of these formations, right? But it is not required by any of the rules that the red guy needs, so let's say in random A, the red guy doesn't need to be up there doing that job in random A. We just need to make that picture. There's no rule that says a specific person needs to do a specific, be in a specific position on all of these randoms. The reason we do designate a role is because of what we call a continuity, or essentially what we've learned through experience is the way to minimize movement from one formation to the next. And if we go to this video, you can see that here we move from a side body to the bow. And if I show you that again, here's a side body and we move to a bow. You can see if we do that maximally efficient, as these diagrams showed you, it's really very small moves for everybody. Now, red could have done yellow's job, yellow could have done green's job, but there's no way to get from side body to bow more efficient than what we just show right here. And while that's not always 100% true from every random to every random, and especially when we add in blocks, it's certainly a really good guide, and it's most often true. And another reason we have continuity or have assigned roles for all of the randoms and the blocks is because skydiving is sort of, we have such limited time to practice, even with the wind tunnels, that by giving the same people the same jobs over and over again, people get good at those jobs. They specialize. And by specializing, they're able to do their best when it comes down to the set of formations or blocks that were assigned in a competition. So the two reasons why we have these roles are, one, it tends to lead us towards most efficient movement, and two, it allows people to specialize and get good at the things that their role require. Next, I want to talk a little bit about basic concepts of building randoms and of building the blocks. So I'm going to stop sharing. You can sort of see my face for a bit. With respect to building randoms, we always say that the very first thing you want to do is look across the center. That everybody is, raise your hand if you're sort of familiar with the idea of cross-referencing, right? Okay, so the idea here is that I'm gonna look across the center, and that's the information that's gonna tell me where I'm supposed to go from one formation to the next. Next, I'm going to move my body into position to make the picture that I've been assigned. Like let's say it's the random, if we go back to the side body to the bow. I'm gonna make that picture with my body. And then lastly, I'm going to look at the grips as needed and take the grips. So the order of the movement is I'm looking. With my looking, I'm gonna move my body into the correct position while looking, and then stop, look at the grips, pick up grips. What I see a lot of people doing when they're moving is they key, look at where the grips are first, move to the grips, and then afterwards check that they're in the right spot. And if you do that, you lose the information along the way, and we're more likely to sort of not be in the right spot, you know? But if I'm always looking as I'm moving, then I always know that I'm in the right spot, making the picture with the rest of my group. The other thing that's really important about looking while I'm moving is that four-way is not about how perfectly you do your move. It's about how quickly the four people can build the next formation. So even if one person perfectly moves exactly how they should according to diagram A and diagram B, if the rest of the group is over 10 feet away, it doesn't really do you any good, right? But by looking, you could adjust with your group and you can all make that formation quicker. So the point is that it's not about each of the 4 people trying to be perfect. It's about each of the 4 people watching each other and trying to stay close and work together with each other. And if we do that, then we can deal with the imperfections. If instead I make my move, then look and see how perfect I was and how perfect everybody else is, well, maybe I'll get lucky and maybe I won't. You know? Next, I want to talk a little bit about the concepts of blocks and some thoughts on doing blocks, and then some thoughts on how to evaluate blocks. So again, I'm gonna open up and share from my app. Okay. Oh, sorry. So again, here we have block 21 or zigzag marquee. When we think about doing a block, we generally want to think about it in the order in which the time order in which stuff happens. So the very first thing I want to know about a block is, what does the build look like? And if we have lines, like here, you can see where are the axes and where is everybody relative to the axes on the block. So step 1, what does the build look like? Step 2, where's the key coming from? In block 21 or zigzag marquee, the key is coming from blue and green, and we're letting go of each other when we see that our partners are on. Next, we're going to think about the move or enter. Enter is what we call the move to get from point A to point B, or from the first formation to the final formation. The enter may include pictures we can see along the way to give us a roadmap to get there. So in this example, the picture I stopped at is a really good picture that everyone doing block 21 can try to make happen as they do their block. Here is another picture that we see as we try to do block 21, and then here's the close. Questions that we want to ask ourselves are, for each person, and I'll do as an example the guy in the green helmet. What direction are they moving, and how far do they step out or make their move? How fast should they move? And the answer is typically to match the other piece. If there are 2 pieces here, then each piece matching the speed of the other. And then there's the question of how much rotation, and you can see that the pieces are rotating, and how much rotation should each piece do. Finally, there's a question of levels. And if I skip to the later part here, you can see who's going over and who's going under, and how big are the levels we're trying to make. And then the very last thing is the close. What does the close look like? In this example, the close is a compressed between the outside center and inside center. So again, if we break down how we think about a block, we want to think about 1, the build, then the key, then the interpictures, which includes the direction and distance of moves, the speed of the move, and the amount of rotation. We want to think about the levels, and then finally, what does the close look like? if when evaluating your own blocks, you think about it in that order, then it really helps you to break it down and improve and address the problems in the order in which you should fix them. So in other words, if I'm looking at my block 21 and the close isn't right, but the key was off, then I say fix the key first. If the key was good, but that step out wasn't right, well then fix the step out next. If the step out was good, but we didn't rotate, or one person or one group was faster than the next, then we fix that next. And then if all of that, and including the levels, is correct, but we say crash on the close, or we're off on the close in any other way, then we fix the close last. So the guideline here is think chronologically about a block from start to finish and fix it that same way. Cool. Okay. Well, I've talked about a number of different concepts from the very, very beginning of like what is four-way to what is a continuity plan to why we have different roles and the qualities of those roles and how to be efficient, and then a little bit of thoughts on doing the moves, whether doing randoms or doing blocks. I'd like to open up now and ask for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing and take a look at the chat. And Jeanette, do you have Okay, I'm looking at questions. Are there any questions for me, guys? Cat, where's your cat? There's lots of chatting. Christy frickin'. Oh yeah. Well, I'll give people a chance to ask questions, but if not, that's fine too. I hope you. Okay, what are some other beginner blocks? Good question. Okay, so what are some beginner blocks? So the dive pool was actually broken out into sort of 3 leagues that the National Skydiving League, which is an organization that runs local meets, had sort of predetermined generally based on difficulty, and also if they demand slot switching, which I could talk about as well. But as far as the easier or harder blocks, if we look at single A, double A, or triple A blocks, I'm going to show you once again what they are. Okay. Okay. So I can actually select the single A blocks in my app, and you can see block 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 19, and 21. These are, it's arguable, but these are the more basic blocks, some of the easier blocks to do. If we move on to double A, then we add block 11, block 13, block 14, block 15, block 18, block 19, block 20, and 22. Those are more challenging blocks. And then the final blocks, the AAA blocks, include 3, 5, 10, 12, what am I forgetting? 16 and 17. And those are more challenging because they will actually have you switch roles when you do them, which means the outside center and point switch roles and tail inside center switch roles. So I would say that if you were starting out with blocks, following the single A guidelines is a pretty good rule of thumb. 2, 4, 6, 7, 9, those are some of the easier ones. 21. When learning blocks, is there a good progression? So yeah, I think I kind of answered that, right? I think that's a pretty good way to do. Start with the single A blocks, then move on to the double A, and then move on to the triple A blocks. How important is it to keep a new flyer in the same slot? I personally think that when you're learning four-way, that there's sort of two competing things. One, there's so much to learn that if you can mostly be in the same position, I think that's a good idea, because there's so many other things to learn. Staying in one position at least keeps that one thing consistent. But on the other hand, I've also seen people very quickly say, oh, well, I'm a point, or I'm an outside center, and lock themselves into that position such that they miss opportunities because they're unwilling to do other positions. And I think that's a big mistake. You know, for those of us that love four-way, what you'll find more and more is you're not a point, you're not an outside center, you're just a lover of four-way and skydiving. Jeanette did, I don't know how many years, something like 8 or so years as outside center before and won a world meet as outside center before she became inside center on the latest iteration of Rhythm. When Doug and Andrew joined Rhythm, what we had was 2 outside centers and 2 points. And we didn't say to ourselves, oh, we're looking for new teammates. Jeanette and I, we're outside center and point. We need an inside center and tail. What we said is we want to find the people who are compatible with us. Do they have the same goals? Do they have the same interests as us? Yeah, for sure. Do they have a certain minimum amount of skill and talent? For sure. But it was much more about their commitment level, their interests. And once that happens, I think the position really comes second to that. And you'll see that among all of the top teams. And it's much, much more important to have the right person than it is to be in the right slot. And so for me, I say, one, for sure, when you're first starting out, if we can eliminate one more variable and stick to one formation, one slot, one position, more often than not, that's great. But if at the point at which it becomes a hindrance to your participating with groups, then be more open and take it as an opportunity to learn more. When is a good time to jump a number to start looking at four-way? That's a good question. I think you can start right away. You know, Jeanette had 40 jumps when she joined her first team, and I remember it's a kind of a fun story because there was a team, they were looking for a fourth, and there was a guy who was sort of a facilitator of teams on the drop zone, and he reached out to Jeanette and he said, Jeanette, I think you should join this four-way team. And she had 40 jumps, so she knew nothing, you know, and she said, I don't know, is it safe? And you can imagine that's what, as 40 jumps, you want to wonder, is joining this team going to be safe for me? And the guy said, it's not safe. He said, if you join this team, it's very likely that you're going to get hooked. You'll do it obsessively. You may quit your job. And if your boyfriend or husband doesn't do the same, you'll leave him as well. And it happened to be very, very prescient, I guess. That's pretty much exactly what happened. Unfortunately, I followed suit eventually, and Jeanette didn't have to leave me. But yeah, I think if Jeanette can do it at 40 jumps, I think anybody can. You know, some guidelines for sure I would say is you should be comfortable tracking away from 3 other people and a videographer above you. You know, so that's going to depend on who the 3 other people and videographer are. You know, the more experienced everybody else is, the less experienced you need to be. But that, I think, is really important. Do you have sufficient altitude awareness such that if the dive is going well, you're still going to break off and pull away at the right time, break off and track away at the right time, and not allow the dive itself to be a distraction from your safety? You know, but beyond that, I think get started as soon as you can. Given that IC should set the angles, should the inside center just fly to the right spot relative to the center of formation or to the right spot relative to the outside center? So this is a really good question. So I said the inside center sets the angles. And so the question is, does the inside center just go to the right spot, even if if nobody else is there? Or do they kind of work more with the outside center especially? And what I say is yes. You know, it's always, and this is one of the things I love about skydiving, is that it's equal parts, I think, art and science, you know? And so absolutely the inside center, sorry, yeah, okay, I'm gonna stop sharing and go back to just me. But absolutely the inside center should have an idea of the angle they're setting, should intend to go to that angle. But if everybody else is 10 feet away somewhere else, well, then we need to do a little bit of meeting in the center of mass, you know? So what I always think about is have an intent, but then I also understand where my point and tail are. And I try to put myself as inside center, as outside center, between point and tail. And if I'm always drawing a line between them in space and sort of putting myself relative to them from one formation to the next, then even as they move, if that means that I didn't do exactly what I would have according to the drawings, I'm going to do my best job of being efficient. Does that make sense? So one, yes, know where you're trying to go and do your best to do that as inside center. But two, always have in mind the point and tail, and sort of split the difference, trying to minimize the total distance that everybody needs to go based on where everybody has gone, you know? I definitely, I wouldn't say a pet peeve of mine, but I definitely feel like when you have sort of that one person that says, well, I was in the right spot, you weren't in the right spot if everybody else was 10 feet away from you. You're not in the right spot, so you make the formation, and we all get the same amount of points. So what it's about is being as efficient as you can be with the group. To expand on Kyle's question, should a newbie stick to one slot or try all of them? Okay, so back to Kyle's question of should a newbie stick to one? So again, I think a newbie, better to try to stick with one slot if you can. And then along those lines, one might ask, where should we put the newest person? And well, I think that varies. For sure, if you think about the characteristics of the different slots and the idea that the inside center and the outside center are working together to set a lot of the angles, and if you think about the fact that the tail is in facing so much of the time, we often will put the newer person in tail because they know they're going to be looking in facing compared to point, and you can be following the lead of the conductor or inside center. That being said, I wouldn't want you to think that means that the tail is always the less experienced person, or the tail is an easier job, because as we gain more experience, the tail has very, very difficult moves and challenging moves. As I talked about already, they can be very, very physical, and you want someone who's really good doing that role, as is true for all of them. So I just want to say that putting a newer person in tail is often a good idea, but that shouldn't lead you to think that tail is the easiest position, because it certainly isn't. You mentioned that the red helmet guy doesn't have to be on the top of the diagram on some randoms. What randoms are done in multiple ways more than others? Okay, so yeah, there are a lot of different formations, or sorry, there's a number of formations that we do a number of different ways. Unfortunately, I don't have the diagrams for alternate engineering to show you, but some examples are the L, the adder, and I may try sharing, and I'm gonna open up my randoms here. So if we look at L, the adder, this formation is done a lot of different ways. We can do that such that the green guy is actually on the back, taking a cat on the yellow guy, and the yellow guy takes a side body on the blue guy, and the blue guy takes a cat on the red guy. That's another way to do it, and that's very, very common. You can also mirror it so that everyone's sort of in a 180 from where they are, and it has a little bit of other changes as well. But so adder, without the diagrams to be able to show you exactly, is one that has a lot of different variations. While we don't do this a lot, you can see donut J. Very often we are what we call left-handed, where our left hands are taking the donut, but on some occasions we might do a right-handed donut, so everybody turns a 180. Another formation we do lots of different ways is the phalanx, the Q. And again, without showing you all the different diagrams, you can do that a lot of different ways. But I would say for nearly, if we kind of, just out of curiosity, I'm just gonna run through them and tell you which ones that we as Rhythm have different ways to do. So we do the A more than one way. We do the B, we do the C, we do the D, we do the E. We rarely do the F another way, but we could. We do the G several ways, the bow for sure, the donut, yes. We rarely do the K a different way. We do the L a different way. The M, that's pretty standard. Hard to do that different. We do the N different ways. We do the O different ways. We rarely do a P a different way. And we do the Q different ways. So I don't know how many that was, but I'd say that out of the 16 randoms, probably 12 or more are done multiple different ways. But what I would say is really until you're quite advanced, and what I mean is literally doing the advanced draw and probably well into that, you really don't need to have more than one of every random formation. What suggestion do you have for visualizing practicing axes over the next month without other humans for reference? That's a really good question. What I think is, imagine yourself moving from a star to that formation. And then you can visualize how your body is oriented from that star to that formation. And I think that will help you to not just remember the formation, but remember where you are relative to the axis, right? So for instance, from M to N, you guys see the M and the N there? It may not be immediately obvious that the N is not exactly on that axis. Do you guys see how it's a little slanty? Blue and green are not exactly on the x-axis, but shifted a little bit. Well, I think if you imagine yourself in an M, and then imagine yourself going to the N, then you can visualize that little bit of move that changes the angle, such as you see going from M to N here. And you can use these diagrams to double check yourself that you were right. But if all you're doing is visualizing the formation alone without having a starting point, then I think you're missing an opportunity to cement in what these angles are, you know? Other questions? Can you mention the exit as how it sets the spirit of the dive? Okay. Question about the exit. Yes, so for sure, in skydiving, the exit I think is really, really important. For one thing, if you think about 35 seconds having being the time that we're scoring, and the hill is roughly about 10 seconds, nearly quarter to a third of your time is on the hill and right out the door affected by the exit. So for sure, the exit's really important, and a good confident exit can help you feel good and confident for the rest of the skydive, and a nervous or faltered exit can certainly affect the rest of the skydive as well. But I would also say this: we all have rough exits, and it is definitely not in your best interest to think to yourself, well, once if the skydive is bad, well then the whole thing it goes to hell, you know? I think that, I'll give you an example. At Nationals, at CSC, I think it was 2018, something like that. Was it Paris? Okay, Paris 2017. We had a very rough exit. You can go try to find it. I think the exit was an L or something. I made a mistake. I tried to unfold too quickly, and I nearly funneled, and it was rough, and it felt bad in that split second. But immediately my thought was, get back into it, and the exit's over, we're moving forward. And we ended up actually getting the high score on that round, even after a bad exit. So the moral of that story is every team, even teams at the highest level, sometimes will have problems and their exits won't be perfect. The mark of doing well is being able to move on from those glitches, even when what you want to be doing is saying, oh shit, you know, I can't believe that's what happened. Cool. Okay, guys. Well, thank you very much. It's been an hour, and I'd love to, if you have more questions, I'm happy to kind of answer them offline. I'd like to wrap up. I want to let you know what's coming up next is we are going to be talking about, we have for subscribers only, we have a set of seminars in which we're going to talk about every single block and the technique of those blocks, every random exit and block exit and the techniques of those exits. So if you have a subscription, it's included for free in that subscription. If you don't, please consider getting one, man. For just $100, you get a year of the app, plus what's going to end up being probably, I don't know, 6 to 12, I don't know how many hours, about 10 hours of video lectures on all of these blocks and what you should be thinking about from me and Jeanette talking about it. How you do it, subscribe, and if you go to the app and you're a subscriber and you go to the randoms section of the app, in the random section, there's a password item. If I click on that password item, it's going to pop up with a code, and then when you go to the URL, and the URL is in the email I sent to all the guys, it's also on Facebook, it'll ask you for that password, you enter in that password, and then you can join the meeting. And I'm just asking, please don't share the password, that's all. But yeah, there's going to be a series of block lectures, exit lectures, all for people simply for subscribing. Also, I'm going to have a couple of more free lectures. One that just talks about the basic concepts of exits. One that's about performing at your best as well in competition. And that, believe it or not, there are skills we can practice in practice to get us better at performing at big competitions. Cool. Okay, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope I'll see you at future ones as well. And if you have any additional questions, please send them to me. I'm happy to answer. Also, for those of you who have your app open, just want you to know that if you go to just about every section, you see up on the upper right corner, there's this Ask Rhythm bubble. You can hit Ask Rhythm, and I have no email account set up, but you, and feel free to ask us any questions you have. You're in the app, you're playing around with it, you're looking at something and it poses a question to you. Click on Ask Rhythm and send that question to us, and we're really good about answering, especially right now when we got very little else to do. Thank you again, everybody. Thanks for joining. Bye.
Thanks, Steve. This was great.